up. It's a special day for Randy Grabow and the Grabow family. If you haven't gathered, a lot of the songs this morning were about God's faithfulness, and that's what his message is about. How God has been faithful in his life through a pretty big story. And so just going to pray right now as God leads them in this story again that would bring you hopefully encouragement. God, thank you for the many times you have reminded us that you're all powerful. God, forgive us for the times that you're trying to remind us that we're just too busy, too distracted, too selfish. But God, this morning we give you our attention, and we hopefully are reminded from the story of your own story and our own individual lives that, God, how faithful you are, how good you are, and how you have a plan for each and every day of our life, ultimately to become more like you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
A few weeks ago, with Amanda Snell's help, we memorized a Bible verse in church. Anybody remember that enough and feel brave enough to stand up and quote it? Go ahead, Amanda. Okay, consider what great things he has done for you. Thank you, Amanda. What we want to do today is share with you one of the great things that God has done for us. And I appreciate Pastor letting us speak today because today is the 30th anniversary of that event. And it's a significant enough event in our life that a lot of times as our kids were growing up, we'd relate to whether this event, whether what was happening now, or something we were trying to remember, happened before or after this particular event. And it's such a miraculous thing in our minds that if God wouldn't have been there to intervene and protect us, both myself and Wendy and Bretta all would have been dead. And as you see the story, I'm sure you're going to agree with that. So we want to share with you that experience in as much detail as we can, and hopefully as you'll be able to see some pictures. And by the way, these are the pictures that the police took, and they took a lot more than this, but they took them because they expected it to be such a significant thing because of the possibility of death here. But this happened on September 24th, 1993. We had our last load of hay about ready to bale, but Wendy and I had some things we had to do in Rochester, so we went shopping with Bretta to Rochester, and we came back about 3:30.
Bretta was 2 years old.
Yeah. My dad had a tractor and a baler already hooked up, so he went out to the field to where we were going to be baling. And Bretta asked us if she could ride along on this last load of hay because she had done that a number of different times through the summer, and she enjoyed being on it, and we knew it was going to be the end of the haying season. So we agreed to do it. And so I was driving my John Deere B tractor and pulling a hay wagon out to the hay field, and we pulled out of the driveway, and what happened?
Well, if you are familiar with a hay wagon, we have the back of the wagon, and there are these planks.
Okay, I guess I went out of order. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
This picture, for those of you who have never been to our place, and Bretta's going to get mad at me for getting out of order too much here, so I got to be careful. This picture, if you've never been to our place, is taken from just south of our driveway, looking out towards Forestville Park, and that road up there in front of that house goes to Forestville Park. If you've ever been there, you've been by our place. And that house up there is where my mom and dad were living at that time, and that's important to see the distance there because that's going to come up a number of times as we tell our story. Sorry, Wendy.
So, back to my hay wagon. We have 3 big planks, levels of planks in the back side of the wagon, like you can see there. I had Bretta, I was standing holding this little child's hand. We pulled out of the driveway. I don't know why, but I just thought I needed to look ahead and look behind us and see if there's any vehicles coming. And sure enough, it was clear both ways. And so I put my one arm on the top plank, and I was holding my daughter's little hand. And there are times, I think, maybe all of you had probably wondered, so is God speaking to me, or am I just being afraid of some thought in my head? But at that time, a thought did come to my mind. The thought was, what if you get hit? There was no fear that came with that thought. But I thought, so if we got hit, maybe I should have my arm hooked around the plank. So I did. I hooked my arm around the plank. And maybe I shouldn't be holding her little fingers. Maybe I should be holding her arm. So I got my hand on her arm, and bang, we were hit. I'm convinced that the Lord spoke to me that day.
There were two gentlemen that went to Wyckoff that morning for the purpose of buying a car, and they went in a pickup. And they were there at least by 11:30 that morning, and this is 3:30 or 3:45 in the afternoon when this happens. So they were coming back, and my guess is that the guy coming in the truck, who's the one that hit us first, was racing home. They were from Iowa, and the second guy was trying to catch him, and they were racing to catch each other. But the first guy, and they had spent their time in the bar. So the first guy hit us with the truck, and you can see it's not too clear on this picture, but there's a dent right in that wagon on the bottom there. That's where he hit, and that's exactly where Wendy and Bretta were standing.
Right where Bretta was, right in front of, she was right in front of that.
Mm-hmm. And in this next picture, it shows some skid marks. And that's the truck that hit us, of course. The skid marks show, and those are his right wheels. So his left wheels were already over the center line when he started to brake. And as you can see from that picture, well, even better, later pictures, when I drive my tractor, I drive with the outside wheel on the white line. So that means there's probably close to 4 feet between the inside wheel, and the yellow lines. So if he'd have turned to the left rather than turning to the right, he'd have went by us without him hitting us. But instead, it's like he turned in intentionally to get us. Now, I guess that's not the truth, but he was drunk enough so that his decision-making ability was kind of impaired, and so he ran into us and hit us in the back.
Bretta fell down first. She just fell right to the floor. I was still holding her, and in an accident like this, the first lunge forward, you can hang on. So I was hooked, so I hung on. But there was a second lunge forward. I couldn't maintain that anymore. So both of us then, we were pushed to the front of the wagon, maybe about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way to the wagon, or from the front, or from the back to the front.
Probably where that bunch of hay is there as you look through the slats there.
So I was sitting Indian style, loose on that wagon with my daughter in my lap. And we were, at that time, we could feel the wagon was rising, the front was rising up, and it was turning to the left and to the right because of the wagon tongue itself was loose from the tractor. And then before we were still going quite a ways, and then the wagon itself started to climb up Randy's rear tires. I thought we were going to flip over.
So what happened was, and I brought some visual aids along, and I've kept these for this purpose. When he hit us in the back of the wagon, he jammed the tongue into the tractor, and I didn't bring the drawbar along, which is solid metal, about 1 inch thick, and that got bent too. But he bent this wagon tongue. Now, I don't know if, obviously, this wagon tongue has two lips on it. And maybe I should bring this over here a ways. And it snapped the bottom lip off when it bent it like this. And so that forced the tongue up. And when the tongue went up on a John Deere B, the battery box is right underneath the seat. And so when the tongue went up, it made that dent there. Yeah, hold that a little bit. Not up that high, Cam. I'm not lifting this. Right like that. And it dent the battery box, which you can see, and it drove the seat forward so that when I finally got the tractor stopped, my chest was against the steering wheel.
He turned back and he said, "What's going on?"
And so in this next picture, then you can see where the wagon ended up. It's right on top of the wheel. And like Wendy said, if it would have been going much further, it could have went right over the top and driven me even further into the steering wheel. But what happened was, after that first hit, it bent the wagon tongue, so it went up and smashed into the battery box. Then there was a space. Then it backed off. The wagon backed off because now it was loose, and the tongue fell down. And so then it was the sharp end of that tongue was making gouge marks in the road. We went back later and counted 16 different gouge marks where that tongue gouged into the road as it was bouncing along until we finally got the thing stopped.
And that is why we felt like we were on that flying carpet ride, because we were going up and left and right because of that hitting the road that way.
And so the tractor and the wagon, the tractor's moving and the wagon's going like this. So if Wendy hadn't been hanging on to Bretta and that back slat of that wagon, the first time we were hit, they'd have been in between all that. Would have thrown them right in between of it as it was happening. And you can imagine what would have happened in that situation. The wagon tongue, and you can see the tongue a little bit here. It's kind of hard to see. But this is the tongue right there. And there'll be another picture that shows that a little bit more. So when we finally got stopped, the tongue was underneath the tractor and the wagon was coming up over the top. In the next picture, it shows a little bit closer, more of a better angle of it. And again, you can see that the seat was pushed ahead. The battery box is where that light is. And the seat was pushed ahead so that steering wheel is right, and that's my dad sitting on the tractor at that time, pushed right into his chest. And again, what's interesting, look at that battery box there again, and imagine that tongue, if it wouldn't have been bent to the point that it was, instead of coming up and hitting the battery box, it would have speared right through me. But because it was bent at the right angle, the right amount, and it came up at the right time, all that stuff put together, I didn't have any injuries from that. Okay, so we got the tractor stopped, and I got off the wagon, and I got off the tractor, and I saw the truck that was in the ditch behind us. And that's obviously how he hit us with that corner, because he turned in that way, if you remember those skid marks, and hit us with that corner of his truck.
Bretta and I were still sitting on the front of the wagon.
Yep. And so I asked the guy, he didn't want me to call the police. Two reasons. One, he was drunk, and the third one, he didn't have any insurance. So I said, well, I wanted to make sure I had enough information on to do that, so I went back to get his license plate and make sure I could at least call somebody if for some reason that doesn't happen. So I did that. I went back to the truck, and obviously his license plate was on the back. And when we got talking a little bit, then he wanted to come up and see how much damage was done on the wagon, because he figured that's all he was going to have to pay for. But in the meantime, Wendy and Bretta are sitting on the wagon.
Yes. I asked Bretta was crying, and I said, Bretta, are you crying because you are hurt, or are you crying because you are scared? She says, Mom, I'm scared. So I was relieved that she was not injured, or at least to our knowledge, she wasn't injured. And then to the, let's see, on our right, a black,
Opposite side of the road.
a black, or our left, yeah, a black vehicle. I think it was what was it?
Scout, something like a Scout,
Yeah,
probably.
Anyway, two gentlemen were driving, and they came and they parked right sort of in front of us, but to the side of the road. And this one young man jumped out and he said, "Has anybody called the police?" We said no. So then the other gentleman, who was the driver, he backed up and he went up to Randy's mom's place and he called the police. And the other young man stayed with us and he said, "I will direct traffic," which was great. So here he is standing in the middle of that road, and then here comes this vehicle, and he is waving his hands, trying to make this guy stop, the one that's coming, and he wouldn't. So the man had to jump out of the way just to save his own life.
And in the meantime, the guy had come back from calling
Yeah.
911 at my mom's place and parked about in the same spot, so there's not much room. At that point, our road has been redone since then, but at that point there wasn't any shoulder on that road, so there's not much room in between things. So anyway, after I'd gone back to talk to the guy in the truck, then he and I were walking back to see what damage was done on our vehicles, and then these other two guys show up at the same time.
And right now, the 911 guys are coming.
Already, because they'd already called. But as we were walking back, okay, this picture shows if the Scout would have parked where that person is standing there, probably, so there wouldn't have been too much room in between those two vehicles, between our wagon and his vehicle, for him to get through. But another guy came along in the car that they had bought in Wyckoff, and I was walking just in front of the truck driver. And this next slide shows the situation. As I was walking in front of him, and you can see the yellow line there. There's quite a bit of room in between the wheel and the yellow line. But I was walking here, and the truck driver was walking a couple steps in front of me, a little bit to my left. And this car comes along that they had purchased in Wyckoff, and the brakes, we found out later that the brakes weren't any good on it. In fact, there was brake fluid where it eventually got stopped. There was brake fluid on the road where it had been draining out of.
He was going as fast, so fast that I couldn't tell what color the car was. I mean, he just zoomed right by.
Yeah. And he says he was blowing his horn, but nobody else remembers
You don't have
that.
a memory of that?
Because if he had been blowing his horn, we'd have heard it and we'd have been tense for what happened, but he wasn't. But he came back along and hit us both from behind as pedestrians.
And so I saw Randy, we were still on the wagon, and I saw Randy over here. He took a quick turn to the left and went down and out of my sight. So I thought I was a widow and I had to sell a farm.
And part of this, a lot of this is, from this point on, my memory is gone except for a couple incidents. I had a concussion as a result of this. So a lot of this is from Wendy's memory and looking at the pictures and trying to understand it as the police gave them to us 9 months later. We couldn't get the pictures until all the litigation was over in court. So we didn't really understand all this stuff until 9 months after it happened. But I was walking probably about right where that sunspot is there when he hit me. And he hit me right here on the calf. You know, like when a football player gets clipped, what happens to him? He goes feet fly out and his head goes down and hits the turf. And a lot of times they don't get up. They got helmets on. I just had a little hat on, and this is on pavement, not sod. And I went down, like she says, I turned a quarter turn and went down, and I went through the tractor and into the ditch on the other side. We asked the policeman when we finally got the pictures, how did I do that? I had no idea.
It's just like the Lord zoomed him through.
And as you look at it, you know, if I went down there, again, there's that wagon tongue right there. The wheels are there, the rest of the rest of the wagon is here. There's not much space to get through. But I ended up in the ditch on the other side in front of the other big wheel. So,
And I got off the hay wagon, Brett and I, and we looked down on the pavement to try to find Randy, and all I saw was his hat. It was still rolling back and forth, so he wasn't there. So then I walked in front of the tractor.
and what was your reaction when you
Well,
saw that?
Yeah, well, I thought, I thought you might be dead.
And she said she thought she was a widow and she would have to sell a farm.
Right. So then I went ahead of the tractor and I saw this other man's body laying on the pavement. I thought, so should I go help him? No, I saw his abdomen going up and down. I thought, okay, he's breathing. I'll go find my husband. So I kept on looking, and here he was lying in the ditch at an angle. He was responsive. I was able to ask him, so where do you hurt?
Let's hold on to that for a minute, okay? We're getting ahead of ourselves. The next picture shows the car that hit us. And obviously he hit me with his bumper, but the other guy was standing a little bit to my left, so he ended up on the hood. You can see the dent of the hood where he hit, and carried him up the road, I don't know, 100 feet, a couple hundred feet, before he rolled off of the car. So that's when Wendy came around the truck and saw, or the tractor, and saw him laying. He was up there that far that she could see him breathing, so she continued to look for me. So that dent is from him. So now we go back to the tractor situation and how I got through there on this next picture. I guess, Bretta, I'm on number 14. There we are. Again, here's the wagon tongue. Right there, you can see the top lip is still on it. The bottom is gone, and it's in that bent position. So the only hole that's big enough for me to get through is right there, between that wheel, between the wagon tongue. But where I ended up was over here. I had a red shirt on. That's my shirt laying there that they cut off of me later on when the ambulance gets here. So I went through a hole that size. Now, I don't know if you have a John Deere Bees or been around them, but they're pretty low to the ground. And I've measured the distance from the ground to where the drawbar is, and it's about 12 inches. So when he knocked me down, he threw me through that tractor, that much space, and probably that wide. How do I get through that? Okay, now in addition to that, when he hit me, what happened was he hit me in that spot right there. I had a big bruise right there. But it drove this knee in and it hit this leg over here, and I had another big bruise there. What happened was this knee got bent so far that I think it's called the anterior cruciate, the ligament that's inside your knee is completely tore. And the one on the inside of my knee was 85% gone, we found out later on. So when he hit me, he drove this knee into that one. If it wouldn't have been for hitting this other leg, that ligament would also been completely torn, and my leg would have been flopped to the side as I went through that tractor. And I wouldn't have made it. My leg would have caught on the tractor tire, and my head would have swung around, and I still get under that tractor once in a while to switch the drawbar around. And once I'm under there, I don't move my head at all, because if I do, I'm going to bump my head on the top, and it hurts just from bumping it, much less being thrown through at a car hitting you at 40 miles an hour or more. So my leg had to be stopped by this leg, or I wouldn't have went through straight. Also, somehow or another, I don't know where my arms went, but either they had to be this way or back up over my head, or my arms would have been hooked on something, and that would have swung me around into something. In addition to that, if he would have hit me with more than just his bumper, instead of knocking me down, I'd have been thrown into the tractor this way at that speed, all kinds of damage. But it didn't. Somehow or another, I got through that hole. And I do not have one injury from going through that hole. I had two significant injuries, and one of them was the knee, and I'll talk about that a little. Well, I'll talk about the knee now, I guess. I never really had any pain in that knee, but it ripped it up enough so that blood ran to my foot. My foot got all black. And I didn't realize how significant the damage was until later, and if we have time, we'll get into that part too. But that knee, the other injury I had was I ended up, the only blood I lost, I had 3 stitches on the top of my head. Externally, that's the only blood I lost out of this whole thing. So then Wendy went around to find me. You can continue on with yours now.
The one thing that he did say that was understandable was, how could you believe within 5 minutes we would have 2 accidents? So even though he had a concussion, he was still thinking. So, and the emergency guys got there.
Okay, now before that happened, though, these 2 men that were there, now they'd seen the accident, and now there's 2 bodies on the road besides just damage to some vehicles. So he went back up to call 911 again. But because he called the first time, they were already almost there, almost as soon as the second accident happened. And they were working on us.
I think there were several different ambulances that showed up too. It was at least 2.
This is an action picture. Wendy and Bretta are there under the sign. Wendy's holding Bretta. That's my dad with his back to me, and they're working on me as I'm laying on the ground there, right in front of the tractor.
So, as it was, they sent a helicopter for the other man.
Yeah. So, in all of this stuff that happened, there was not one broken bone. Either me or Wendy or Bretta or this other guy that got hit in the car. He was unconscious. They had to lift him to Mayo 1 by the helicopter, but not one broken bone. Incredible. So, what's amazing to me, first of all, is that all of these things happened in such a fast sequence. If you change anything by a fraction of a second or a fraction of an inch, the whole story would be different. But what's even more amazing is the most incredible part I haven't even told you yet. I told you I had 3 stitches on the top of my head. That's where there was an injury there. So as we were trying to, and obviously we hadn't seen this picture, so we didn't understand what happened there either. So we tried to figure out how I got injured there. Well, our first thought was, well, going through the tractor. Well, I might have peeled like a banana going through that tractor, but that spot should have been the one untouched.
From the position that he was
because I went through foot first.
He had to go foot first.
So I didn't get, that injury was not from going through the tractor. So the second thought is, okay, well, when it knocks you down, your head hit the road. Well, that's true. That would have happened, but not there. The back of my head, maybe, or the side of my head, depending on how I went down. But in order for the stitches on that injury there, my head would have been bent back so far that it would have broke my neck when I hit the ground. So it wasn't from the tractor, it wasn't from hitting the road. So what's left? The picture of the car, I told you already that the bumper hit me in my leg. You see how far that bumper sticks out from the rest of the side of his car. But that's the only thing that hit me initially, is that bumper. That's where the injury was on my calf. What if it would have hit me a little bit, what if he'd hit me a little bit more direct? Probably would have ripped my leg off. The other guy had hit him completely direct, so he ended up on the hood. If he'd have missed me by another fraction of an inch, look at what that rear mirror would have done to my back. But that bumper hit me just, it's only sticking out that much, but that's what hit me. And it knocked me down. And as I was going down, that car was going forward. So that rearview mirror clipped the top of my head at just the same time as I was going down and put those stitches and put that cut in the top of my head. Now you think, okay, well, that's nice. But what if my head would not have hit that rearview mirror? You've seen football players go down. My head would have, and I was going down so fast, my head should have bounced on that pavement. You know what it looks like when you drop a pumpkin on the pavement? That's what should have happened to my head. Or if he'd have hit me a little bit more completely with that rearview mirror on my head, again, you can imagine what I would have looked like. But what happened was that force, that bumper driving me down, and as that rearview mirror was coming by, it clipped the top of my head just enough that it counteracted the downward force so that my head and my rest of my body went through that little opening in the tractor without an injury. No injuries. How do you explain that? A fraction of an inch. I mean, a lot of things are a fraction of an inch or a fraction of a second, but there is no room to move on that one. Or my head would have been totally different one way or another.
We think that the Lord had his angels
And it's almost like,
surrounding us.
yeah, it's almost like when you saw that picture that I went through, it's almost like there was a funnel that forced me through in that one little hole that was there in order to come through it alive. Anyway, the paramedics got there and they were working on me, and eventually they took me by ambulance to Spring Valley. Those of you remember Ray Kruger from the Spring Valley, he's the one that sewed up my head. But the police got there too, and they saw the two bodies that were being worked on. So they were taking pictures and doing all kinds of stuff, and then they started to interview Wendy because she was the only eyewitness.
Yeah, I was the only witness, so they had to interrogate me, and I told them everything I could tell them, and then finished.
I was in the emergency room in Spring Valley by that time, and so they finally, as Ray was working on me and finally was getting done, they bring Wendy in a police car. And that whole time I've been asking Ray, how's Wendy and Bretta? And I kept asking it over and over because I had a concussion. And he didn't know they were in the accident. Nobody else did either, apparently, until when they finally got to the emergency room, they understood that Wendy must have been in it too, and so they told her not to get out of the car.
They helped me. They got me out. They asked, so do you have any pain in your neck? And I said, well, a little. And they said, okay, just be still. We'll get you out. And
So they got her out, and then they sent us by ambulance to Rochester, the emergency room up there. And again, most of my memory is gone. But again, Wendy was awake enough to remember this stuff. The Friday night, all kinds of football injuries. So our emergency room is full of people. And the guy that was working on me was an intern. And so they did x-rays on me and didn't find a broken bone. So he called his supervisor and said, well, what do we do with this guy? He doesn't have any broken bones. We keep him here or send him home. Supervisor said, send him home. So I got up, tried to stand up. I couldn't. I fell over backwards back onto the gurney. And but they said, you're still going home. So there were some people around to help. Two of them are here today, Dale and Barb Schaefer, wherever you are. And another friend, Kent Erding, took us home, and we spent the next couple of days there. But at this point, since there's no broken bones, we don't realize the significance of the injury to my leg. A week later, this was on a Friday night, a week later, Ray was in our men's Bible study, so we had it at our place that night, and he came out, and he grabbed my left leg with his left hand, well, his foot, I should say, and he put his right hand against my knee, and he pushed. He could have pushed that knee right on out if he wanted to. A week later. So here I was walking on a knee, one slip, and I'd be just as bad as if it had happened in the accident. So another whole week of living with that. So Ray got me in with a specialist at Mayo, and as a result, they put a brace on my leg. He said, you got two choices. Either you can have surgery, which is going to take, at that point, I think it was like 6 months to recover, which means I got to sell my cows, I got to sell my farm, because who's going to do my chores? said the other option is to put a brace on there, and hopefully you can strengthen your muscles enough to get it recovered so that you don't have to have a surgery. So that's what we did. We put the brace on, and I went for a whole year with that. A year later, he came back to him and took...
He was going up ladders and doing everything that a farmer has to do.
Yeah.
As long as he had that brace on, he was good to go.
I figured as long as the brace is on, that must mean I'm safe, so I did. I guess I got it for 3 weeks before I started milking again, but anyway. When he took the brace off a year later, he looked at my knee and said, it was the same doctor. He says, if I wouldn't have known what had happened to your knee, I'd say you never even got injured. So, amazing. That as a result of all this, that happened. I want to share a Bible verse with you. Did I forget something? Bretta? I got one more. I'm going to get to you yet, but anything else I've forgotten? On the back of your bulletin, we had 2 verses listed. One is 1 Samuel 12:24, which is Amanda already quoted for us. The other one is Psalm 78, verses 4 and 7. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generations the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might
And the wonders which he has wrought, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments.
The reason we want to tell this is that for us, is a miracle. In a way, at least me, and maybe Brett and Wendy too, but at least me, God's given me 30 extra years that I shouldn't have had. And so what's the result? 1 Samuel 12:24, Amanda, what does it say again? Why? Because of the great things he's done for us. Serve him how? Faithfully with all your heart. As I get to the end of my life, whenever it happens to be now, even though I've got 30 extra years, I want to be able to say that. I've served the Lord faithfully with all my heart because of the great things he's done for us. There's a couple more things that Bretta needs to share here, so I'll let her come up and take over that part, and I might correct her now and then.
So when I was 19 years old, I decided to take these pictures and put them into a bit of a movie format. And when I showed it to my family, when I showed it to my family at Christmas, my dad said something that I really did not remember. See, I was 2.5 years old at the time. And at that point, my mind was refusing to accept the idea of a resurrection.
At 2.5, not at 19.
Yeah, at 2.5. At 2.5, my mind was refusing to believe that there could possibly be a resurrection. So when we were going through storybooks and of what happened during the resurrection, I would point to it and I said, that doesn't happen. That can't happen. People don't come back to life. And also before the accident, whenever I was having a nightmare or something or wanting to get put to bed, I was always asking for Mom. After the accident, I would go to those same storybooks. I'd point to Jesus coming out of the tomb, and I would say, that was Dad. So now suddenly my mind can understand there is a resurrection. Jesus did come out of the tomb. It's true, it happened to me. And after the accident, I was also more wanting to be with my dad. So when I had nightmares, when I went to sleep, I would be asking for my dad. Now, some things that you may be asking at 2.5, when I really remember much. There's 3 things that I remember. One was seeing my dad get hit in front of my eyes. Another was the car ride, or the police car ride up to the emergency room in Spring Valley. And the last one was seeing Mom on a gurney and them taping up any scrapes, whatever she had, in the emergency room.
So 30 years ago today, our family was changed. In fact, for those of you that don't know our family, we have three older kids. Dean is one of them here. So that particular day, our 3 kids could have been orphans very easily. It was an event that we've told the story lots of different times. And obviously, it's just as emotional today as it was then. So, I guess our point is, we have a God who does amazing things. And if anybody ever asks you, are there miracles that still happen today? Yes, there are. Just the fact that we're standing here, to me, is that. So the purpose of that, according to that verse that we looked at in Psalms, the purpose of us telling that story, our story to you, even though it's not easy to stand here and tell it, is so that you should set your hope in God, that you might fear Him and keep His commandments. There's nothing more significant in this life than that. And I think we believe that's why we're still here today, because we want to communicate that with as many people as we can. So thank you for listening to us. And Pastor, you can come back up.
Thank you, Randy, Wendy, and Bretta. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for those final challenge that we would take to heart, that you still do miracles, God. You're the miracle worker, you're the way maker, the peacemaker, the peacekeeper. In the world that gives us so many other messages, we know the truth is that Jesus, you're the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through you. Lord, I pray that our faith would have been encouraged this morning, and for those watching online, that our faith will continue to be not just encouraged, but our faith will continue to grow in a world that doesn't encourage that. But we know that's the purpose of the body of Christ. Keep walking in faith, serve you faithfully, to have this reverential awe of you. So continue to write our stories, God. Let us let you surrender to you so you can write the greatest story of all in a relationship that we can have with you. Thank you that you pursue us. Thank you that your desire is that our eyes would open up to your truth of who Jesus is. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks for coming this morning. Continue to walk in faith, and we'll see you next week.